dive right in and get a little educated.
Oh man, yeah. This is actually the scary part, Clifton, because I get to, well, it's not scary for me because it's actually cool. I get to nerd out on numbers,
Right.
but the fact is that a lot of people uh, don't like numbers, and there are actually three kinds of people in this world, Clifton.
Okay.
And so the three kinds of people. So there are those who know math and those who don't. So and actually it's really interesting because it's proven that 4 out of 3 people, yeah, it's proven that 4 out of 3 people have trouble working with fractions. So
Oh,
so before we dive into refrigerant numbering and naming,
yeah.
we just need to do a little math exercise just
Okay.
to get ready for this.
I'm in.
So everybody, what I want you to follow these directions really quickly, and then we'll see where we end up. So what I want you to do is I want you to think of a number. Don't shout it out loud. Think of a number from 1 to 9, and once you get that number, everybody's got a number.
Hmm.
Everybody, yep, cool. So you have that number from 1 to 9. I want you to multiply that number by 5. All right. So you've got a number from 1 to 9. Multiply that number by 5, and
Okay.
now you have a new number.
Right.
I want you to add those digits together, and now you're going to get a new number. So you thought of a number, you multiplied the number by 5, and
Hmm.
now you added those digits in that number together.
Okay. The original.
All
Yep.
right. So now that you got a new number, I want you to subtract 5 from that number, and now you have a new number. So you thought of a number, you multiplied it by 5, you added the digits together, and then you subtracted 5, and now you have a new number.
Hmm.
Now what I want you to do is I want you to assign a letter to that number. So for example, if your number is 1,
Right.
that's A.
Okay.
If your number is 2, that's B. If your number is 3, that's C. It's, and so on and so forth.
Okay.
So now you have a letter. What I want you to do is think of a country that begins with that letter. So now you should all have a country.
Okay.
And now I want you to think of the last letter in that country,
Hmm.
and think of an animal that begins with the last letter of the country. So now you have a country and an animal. And finally, I want you to think of a color that begins with the last letter of the animal. So you should
Hmm.
now have a country,
Hmm.
a color,
Hmm.
and an animal, which is really strange because the last time I checked, there were no orange kangaroos in Denmark. So, let's move on. Woo! Crazy, right? It's amazing how numbers work. But
Magic with numbers.
yes, crazy.
That is great.
So I call this session refrigerant numbering and naming, everything you ever wanted to know and less, because a lot of this is really not going to make you a better technician, but it will help you answer a lot of questions that might arise when you're talking about refrigerant. So if you talk about a
Absolutely.
refrigerant, oh, what kind of refrigerant is that? Is that an
Yeah.
HFC, a CFC, an HFC? It's an HFO.
Yep.
So I have a few things I want to talk to you about today, and one is the refrigerant series classifications, and basically where all modern refrigerants came from, and talk a little bit about how we remove the flammability of refrigerants, and talk about how refrigerants are numbered, what
Sure.
the lowercase letters after the refrigerants mean, what the uppercase letters mean after the refrigerants, and finally, how can we determine the name of the refrigerant? And not only can we determine the name of the refrigerant, but we could take a refrigerant's number, determine what it looks like, and actually tell what kind of refrigerant it is.
Oh,
Is it a
wow. That's cool.
CFC, HFC, CFC?
Right.
So it's actually kind of really neat how this all works, and it's really mathematical, and it's not super complicated.
Okay.
And we're going to spend some time today talking about some of these classifications. Our 00 series, those are our 2-digit refrigerants, our 11, our 12, 22, 32, those guys. We have the 100 series refrigerants. So those are refrigerants with 3 digits beginning in one, like our 134A or 125. 200 series refrigerants, we're not going to talk about today, but those are your propane-based refrigerants. Those are your 227s, 236s. 400 series and 500 series, those are blends. So our 400 series, those are our 404As, our 454As, our 454Bs. These are blends. These are near azeotropic blends. And then we have our 500 series. The 500 series, those became contraband back January 1, 1996, our beloved 500 and 502.
Yeah, buddy.
We're going to touch on our 600 series and our 700 series. 600 series are our saturated organic. We're going to talk about the difference between saturated and unsaturated and what actually that means.
Okay.
And then we're going to get into the 700 series. Those are saturated inorganic refrigerants, water, ammonia, carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, things like that. And then our 1000 series. Those we're hearing a lot about lately. Those are our 1234YF, 1233ZD, and all fun things like that. We're also going to talk about what those letters mean at the suffixes of these refrigerants. So just wanted to hop in. Most of our modern refrigerants start as a pure hydrocarbon. And we talk about hydrocarbons. Hydrocarbons contain hydrogen and carbon. And the four most popular base molecules for our modern refrigerants are methane, ethane, propane, and butane. So methane is CH4, which is one carbon atom surrounded by 4 hydrogen atoms. And notice the crystalline structure. All of these atoms are joined together at 90-degree angles with each other. So methane, CH4, one carbon atom surrounded by 4 hydrogens. Ethane, right? C2H6, C2, 2 carbons surrounded by 6 hydrogens.
Okay.
Propane,
C3.
C3H8, so 3 carbon atoms surrounded by 8 propane atoms. And butane, 4 carbons surrounded by 10 hydrogens, so C4H10.
You mean
so these are all
actually apply to my HVAC career?
Absolutely. Yep. So these are actually what we call acyclical alkanes. Okay. When we see the word ANE, so methane, ethane, propane, butane, that means that all of these atoms are connected to each other with a single bond. So if you look at any line that's connecting any carbon atom to any hydrogen atom, it's a single line. So methane, meth means 1, eth means 2, pro means 3, bu means 4. So it's saying that all of these methane and these carbon and hydrogen atoms are connected by a single bond. Now, if you think about methane, ethane, propane, butane, pentane, octane, right? Methane, natural gas. Propane in your barbecues at home. Butane in your cigarette lighters. Pentane, fuel oil, number 2. Octane in your gasoline. So hydrocarbons make really, really good refrigerants, but the only problem is they're really, really flammable.
Very flammable.
Yeah. So what we do is we take those hydrogen atoms and we pluck them off the molecule, and we replace them with what we call halogens. And halogens, fluorine, chlorine, bromine, iodine, astatine. So the popular ones in our industry are fluorine and chlorine. Yeah. But we use these halogens to replace the hydrogen atoms to make them less flammable while still maintaining the really good refrigerant qualities that we need. So
some type of an ANE base, some type of a hydrocarbon base.
Absolutely. Yeah. So pretty much all of our refrigerants started off as a hydrocarbon. So if we think about CFCs, all right, CFCs contain CFCs are our chlorofluorocarbons. They contain chlorine, fluorine, and carbon. Our HCFCs contain hydrogen, chlorine, fluorine, and carbon. And our HFCs, our hydrofluorocarbons, contain hydrogen, fluorine, and carbon. So it's really, when we talk about CFCs, it's really about the atoms that make up those base molecules. So once we start plucking hydrogen off a molecule and replacing it with chlorine or fluorine, then what we have is we don't have a pure hydrocarbon. We have what's called a halogenated hydrocarbon, which is a hydrocarbon that we halogenate.
I'll be darned.
All right.
Modified.
So we could break this down again. I'm nerding out a little bit because I
No,
get
no, this
really
is
excited with
great.
this
I've never
topic.
had it explained like this
But,
before. I
but
knew
yeah,
you
so
did
we
this class, but I didn't never sit and listened.
that's cool. Now you don't have a choice.
Yes, sir.
So we have what are called partially halogenated hydrocarbons,
Yeah.
and then we have what are called fully halogenated hydrocarbons. So a partially halogenated hydrocarbon means we only halogenated some of the carbon, the hydrogens.
Atoms. Yeah.
So we only plucked off some of the hydrogens and we replaced those with chlorine and or fluorine. So if we look at our HFC refrigerants or our HCFC refrigerants, the fact that they're hydrochlorofluorocarbons or hydrofluorocarbons, that means that they're still hydrogen.
Right.
So they're only partially halogenated.
Right.
Whereas if we look at a CFC, there's no hydrogen in a CFC. It's a chlorofluorocarbon, which means that that hydrocarbon has been fully halogenated because we replaced all of the hydrogens.
Sure. Started out
So
as hydrocarbon, removed all of the hydrogen, left the carbon, attached whatever new atoms to the molecule.
yeah, and that's a fully halogenated hydrocarbon because there's no hydrogen left. So just some semantics getting into the to the structure of our molecules. So if we know what a refrigerant number is, we can actually get into the numbering system. There's a reason why we number refrigerants the way we number them. So the refrigerant numbering system, originally called the DuPont numbering system,
Right.
adapted by ASHRAE. Now we just generically call it the refrigerant numbering system. And you can use this for refrigerants that have 2, 3, or 4 numbers, like R11, R12, or R134A, or R1234YF, or 1233ZD. As long as the first number is either 0 or 1, but we can actually use it for 200 series refrigerants, the propane. We're not talking about that today. But we don't use it for blends. All right, so a blend is just a mixture of existing refrigerants. So if we're talking about R404A or we're talking about 500 or 502, you can't use this refrigerant numbering system for that. So we're going to convert all of our refrigerant numbers to a 4-digit number. So for example, R22 is going to be written as R0022. R134A is going to be written as R0134. If we have 1234YF, we're going to write that as 1234YF. We're going to forget about the lowercase numbers at the end. I'm sorry, the lowercase letters at the end. We're going to talk about those soon.
Okay.
So here's the way it works. So refrigerant blends, we said it doesn't work. All right. So if we have like a 400 series refrigerant, let's say 454 capital A, 454 capital B, 454 capital C.
Oh, there's difference between capital and lower?
Yeah, we're going to get to the lowers in a little bit. We're going to get rid of the uppers really quick.
Okay.
So our 454, whether it's 454A, 454B, 454C, are made up of the same component refrigerants. So our 454 is made up of R32 and R1234YF. The only difference between the A, B, and C is the percentage of each of those refrigerants in the blend. So 454A, for example, is 35% R32 and 65% R1234YF. And the classification of A, B, or C really was determined by the date that these refrigerants were filed for SNAP, for the Significant New Alternatives Policy Program.
Oh my gosh.
It just so happens that 454A was filed before 454B, which was filed before 454C.
Holy smokes.
So
that simple.
So yeah, 454 is 454. It's R32 and 1234YF, for example. But the ABC are different percentages of those refrigerants, and we know from the ABC which one was filed first, second, or third. Okay. So when we see a capital A, a capital B, we see a capital C. All that is, it's indicating that we have a blend, but also the 4 in front means it's a blend, and the order in which they were filed, the SNAP filing dates determine. If there was another one, if there was another refrigerant with a different composition of R32 and R1234YF, it would be 454 capital D. And the way we're going, we'll have a 454 capital Z soon. But yeah, So the capital letters as a suffix is just the percentage of the refrigerants in the mixture.
Yeah.
Okay, so forgetting about the 400 series refrigerants, the 500 series refrigerants, we're looking at this DuPont numbering system or the refrigerant numbering system, and the furthest number to the right tells us how many fluorine atoms are in a molecule of that refrigerant. So the number all the way on the right is telling us how many fluorine atoms are in a molecule of that refrigerant. The second number from the right represents one more than the number of hydrogen atoms. So whatever that number is, we have to subtract one, and that tells us how many hydrogen atoms are in a molecule. The third number from the right is one less than the number of carbon atoms in the molecule. So whatever that third number from the right is, we add one to it, and that's how many that's how many carbon atoms. And then finally, the left number, the one all the way on the left, tells us the number of unsaturated or double bonds. All right. So it's telling us how many fluorine atoms there are, how many hydrogen atoms there are, how many carbon atoms there are. And our refrigerants are made up of 4 common elements: hydrogen, carbon, chlorine, and fluorine. We do not account for the chlorine in the refrigerant number. So if we have any spots left over, and we'll talk about what that means in a little bit, if we have any open slots, we fill those open slots with chlorine atoms. So it sounds a little crazier than what it is. So here it is. So we have a refrigerant number, the number all the way on the left, how many double bonds we have. The next number is one less than the number of carbons. The next number to the right is the number of one more than the number of hydrogens. And the last number is the number of fluorine atoms. So let's take, for example, R22. All right, so we're going to write R22 as R0022.
Yep.
The number all the way on the right is 2. So there are 2 fluorine atoms. The second number from the right is 2. We subtract 1 from that. So that means we have 1 hydrogen atom.
Okay.
The number third from the right is a 0. So we add 1. Is 1 carbon, and the number to the left of that is 0, so there are no double bonds. So the way this looks is we know this 1 carbon atom. So the 1 carbon atom, if we look back at the earlier slides, that's a methane-based molecule. It's a methane molecule. So R22 started life as methane. And what we did, so methane is 1 carbon atom and 4 hydrogen atoms.
Yep.
And we plucked one of those hydrogen atoms off, and then we plucked another hydrogen atom off, and we replaced those 2 with fluorine. We leave 1 hydrogen alone because it has 1 hydrogen, and we have an empty space. There's only 1 hydrogen atom and 2 fluorine atoms. We have 1 open space, so that open space gets filled with chlorine. So on the left, we have the base molecule of methane, and then on the right, we have what an R22 molecule looks like. And we're going to talk about how we name that a little bit later. But that is what an R22 molecule looks like, and we can get there from the from the number. So it gets a little confusing. Oh, well, this number is 1 less than this. This number is 1 more than this. So if you see a 0, you add 1. That tells you how many carbon is. You take this number, you subtract 1. So there is a refrigerant numbering trick. And this will apply to your 00 series refrigerants, your 100 series refrigerants, your 200 series refrigerants, your pretty much all the way up. Well, it doesn't work for 600s and 700s, but it pretty much works for the 1000 series, your 1234YFs, your 1233ZDs. You add 90 to the refrigerant number. And when we do that, take a look at what happens. If we add 90 to the refrigerant number, now we simply read from left to right: number of double bonds, number of carbon atoms, number of hydrogen atoms, number of fluorine atoms. There's no 1 more than this, 1 less than this. The trick is add 90 to the refrigerant number. That will automatically bring this number down by 1 and bring this number up by 1. So it'll take care of the one more than, and one less than. So let's look back
Interesting.
at R22 and do it again. It makes life a lot easier. And this is how we're going to run the rest of the
This is the way to teach
session.
class. Yeah.
So we took R22, we add 90 to it.
Yep.
90 plus 22, last time I checked, was 112.
Yep.
So now we look at 0, 1, 1, 2. The 0 on the left, no double bonds.
Mhm.
The next number, 1 carbon atom. The next number, 1 hydrogen atom. The next number, 2 fluorine atoms.
That is
So now it's just double bonds, carbon, hydrogen, fluorine. Again, no chlorine in this number. Any open spaces we fill with chlorine. So here is what it looks like. So R22 plus 90 is 0, 1, 1, 2.
Yep.
0 double bonds, 1 carbon atom. 1 carbon atom means we started life as methane.
Yep.
1 hydrogen atom, boom. At the bottom, you see 1 hydrogen. 2 fluorine atoms, bing, bing, those are that. And 1 leftover. And that leftover space gets filled with chlorine. And there we go.
That's simple.
And this will work with multiple refrigerants. So let's do R32. We hear a lot about R32 lately.
Yeah.
So we got R32. We had 90 to R32. 32 plus 90 is 122.
Yep.
So the first number is 0, no double bonds. The next number, 1 carbon atom. Again, R32 started life as methane. Mm-hmm. The next number is 2 hydrogen atoms and 2 fluorine atoms. So let me just back up real quick. Right, here was R22, right? R22 has 1 carbon atom, hydrogen, chlorine, and fluorine. So what type of refrigerant is R22? R22 is a hydrochlorofluorocarbon because it contains hydrogen, chlorine, fluorine, and carbon. So if you're trying to remember what kind of refrigerant R22 is, if you know the DuPont numbering system, you can say, wow, let me do this. And now I know by the finished molecule, I have hydrogen, hydro, chlorine, chloro, fluorine, fluoro, carbon, carbon. So I have a hydrochlorofluorocarbon or an HCFC refrigerant.
Yeah.
HC, hydrochloro, FC, fluorocarbon. So going back to R32, we added the 90. We have 0 double bonds, 1 carbon atom, 2 hydrogen atoms, 2 fluorine atoms. So again, R32 started life as a methane molecule.
Yep.
1 carbon atom, that tells us it's methane. 2 hydrogen atoms, 2 fluorine atoms. No empty spaces.
No room for chlorine.
No room for chlorine. So what kind of refrigerant is R32? R32 is a hydrofluorocarbon because it contains hydrogen, fluorine, and carbon, HFC.
Super simple.
Kind of neat, right? And it's just the numbering system.
Yeah.
So how about R134A?
Okay.
So R134A, add 90 to 134A. 134 plus 90 is 224.
Okay.
No double bonds, right? It's a 0. The next number is a 2 carbon atoms.
2 carbon, that's different.
Yep. 2 hydrogen atoms and 4 fluorine atoms. So 2 carbon atoms tells us that this refrigerant started life as ethane. An ethane molecule is C2H6, 2 carbon atoms surrounded by 6 hydrogen atoms. So R134A, no double bonds, because it's 0, 1, 3, 4, right? 0, 2, 2, 4. 2 carbon atoms, 2 hydrogen atoms, and 4 fluorine atoms. So again, R134A is an HFC refrigerant, hydrofluorocarbon. So the question arises, why did the 2 hydrogen atoms stay on the left? Right? So if you look at that diagram for R134A, I have 2 hydrogen atoms connected to 1 carbon atom.
Right.
And the issue is the lowercase a and the lowercase b that you might see in refrigerants, that indicates that the refrigerants are what we call isomers. So the letter indicates that we have the same elements, the same atoms, but we're putting them together differently. And it has to do with how symmetric the molecule is. So, for example, if we had R134, forget about the lowercase a. R134A means that it is the most symmetric combination of atoms making that molecule. So if you look on the left, you'll see that one hydrogen atom is bonded to one carbon atom and the other hydrogen atom is bonded to the other carbon. If we took that molecule and folded it, it would be perfectly symmetrical.
Yeah.
That's 134. R134A is the next symmetric combination.
Yep.
Where we have two hydrogen atoms connected to one carbon. If there were more combinations, then there would be 134 lowercase b, which there's not. There's no other combination. Those are the only two combinations of those elements. So that's how we know that those two hydrogen atoms are bonded to one carbon. So like I said, 134 is what it looks like on the left.
Right.
134A is what it looks like on the right.
Same amount of atoms in each molecule, but the
Yeah.
arrangement dictates.
Absolutely. That's all it is. So isomer, I always equate isomers to like cousins.
Yep.
You know, they're cousins. They're related.
Yep.
So it's just the order in which the atoms are connected to the base carbon atoms. So when you see a lowercase a, lowercase b, that means that it's the same ingredients put together differently. Okay. So for example, sometimes you'll see R410A, but the A is a lowercase a.
Yeah.
There's no such thing. It's
correct.
410. 410 means it's a blend. It's a mixture of refrigerants. And that's the A. The A talks about how the percentage of each refrigerant in the blend. So when you see R410A, that's a typo.
With the lowercase.
Yeah, if you see R410A with a lowercase a, that's a mistake. That's a typo. Because that's saying you have a blended refrigerant that's an isomer.
Exactly.
Can't be both.
Or uneducated, because actually Jason corrected me on one of my first articles when I got here, and I went, wait.
It happens a lot. Doesn't make you a bad person.
I just didn't understand.
Yeah, doesn't make you a bad person. A lot of people make that mistake.
Yeah, that's part of not going to a formal program. You don't learn all of these fundamentals.
Or you'll see R134A with a capital A. That's not possible. Because R134 is a single compound refrigerant, but the uppercase letters indicate a blend. So kind of interesting.
That's awfully interesting.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw that out.
Yeah. Anyone else out there? Anyone's brain in the community smoking like mine? If so, let us know.
Oh, if it didn't smoke yet, it'll definitely smoke. So the 600 series refrigerants, all right, the only ones we deal with are butane and isobutane. So I just wanted to throw this out there real quick. So the methane, ethane, propane, and butane molecules, all right, are what we call saturated compounds. So if you looked at the string of butane, if you looked at the string of ethane or propane, it was carbon atoms with hydrogen atoms connected at 90 degrees. So when we look back, let's say at, all right, let's even pretend that we're looking at an ethane molecule on the left, where all those surrounding atoms are hydrogens. It would be C2H6, which means two carbon atoms are surrounded by 6 hydrogens. They can't have any more hydrogens. That's the maximum number of hydrogens that we can bond to those 2 carbons. So when we have a methane molecule or an ethane molecule or a propane molecule or a butane molecule, that means that those molecules are saturated. In other words, they can't hold any more hydrogen. So the 600 series refrigerants, this is your butane and your isobutane. These are saturated refrigerants because we can't put any more than the maximum number of hydrogens. So for butane, butane is C4H10. We can't have more than 10 hydrogen atoms. So We say saturated because we can't hold any more hydrogen, and we say organic. Organic refrigerants contain carbon. Butane is a hydrocarbon. So we have organic refrigerants and we have inorganic refrigerants. There are some exceptions. We'll talk about that later. So 600 series refrigerants start with the number 6. The second digit is a 0 if it's a hydrocarbon compound, like butane, hydrocarbon. If that second digit is a 1, that molecule contains oxygen. If the second digit is a 2, they contain sulfur. If the second digit is a 3, it contains nitrogen. So if there's a refrigerant 61 something, we know it contains oxygen. If it's a refrigerant 620 something, it contains sulfur.
Sulfur, yeah.
If the number is 630 something, it contains nitrogen. And then the third digit is just randomly assigned. So the only refrigerants we deal with in the 600 series are isobutane and butane.
Yep.
Where 600 is butane and 600A is isobutane. Okay, take a look on the left. That's butane, C4H10. We looked at that before. And that's called a linear or a string molecule because it's linear or looks like a string. Whereas isobutane, when we see 600A, which is what we use in a lot of our refrigerants, that's a branch molecule. So if you see how the 4 carbons are connected, it forms a Y. Yep. And then to each of those carbon atoms are connected 4 other atoms. So if you look in the top left, you'll see 3 hydrogen atoms, but it's also connected back to that central carbon. The central carbon is connected to 3 carbon atoms, but it's also connected to a lone hydrogen. So if you count, both of these molecules are C4H10, but they just put them together differently.
Yeah.
So these refrigerants, butane and isobutane, are isomers of each other.
Which is why we couldn't use that classification for the refrigerant. We actually would have to go from like our actual name, our 600-600A, to distinguish the formulation.
And the thermal properties of butane and isobutane are similar. They do vary a little bit. Mm-hmm. But if you notice, each one is C4H10. They both have 4 carbons and they both have 10 hydrogens. We just put them together differently. So that's pretty much all that's going on. Wow. 700 series refrigerants. The numbering system for this is a little differently, but it's really, really cool. All right. Because the 700 series, these are saturated, just like the 600 series, but these are inorganic refrigerants. So inorganic refrigerants do not contain carbon, but there is an exception, carbon dioxide. CO2 is a 700 series refrigerant is considered inorganic, but it does contain carbon. Here's the neat thing about the 700 series refrigerants. 700 series refrigerants start with the number 7. Ooh, magic. Ooh. The next numbers that follow the 7 are the molecular weight of the molecule.
Really?
So not going to get too deep into it, but water, okay? Water is H2O.
Yep.
So water is made up of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom.
Yep.
The weight of a hydrogen atom is 1 atomic mass unit, which is a unit of mass at the atomic level. And the weight of an oxygen atom is 16 atomic mass units. So if you add the 2 atomic mass units for the 2 hydrogens and 16 atomic mass units for the oxygen, you get 1 + 1 + 16, which is 18. And the refrigerant number for water is R718.
That is crazy.
And if you
do that with the inorganics.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. So ammonia, NH3.
Yeah.
Right? The weight of a nitrogen atom is 14 atomic mass units. 3 hydrogens. 1 + 1 + 1 + 14 is 17. Yeah. And the refrigerant number for ammonia is R717.
I'll be darned.
So CO2, for example, 1 carbon, 2 oxygen. A carbon atom weighs 12 atomic mass units. Oxygen weighs 16. 2 oxygens, 16 + 16 + 12, 44. R744. Kind of neat.
That's crazy.
So just throwing that out, but that's where the numbers came from. So they deserve to live somewhere.
Yeah.
And the 1000 series refrigerants, This also works with the original numbering system I showed you earlier,
I'm
all
wondering,
right?
yeah, 90 packing
Only these refrigerants, right?
Mhm.
These refrigerants have a 1 in front, which means that there is a double bond.
Right.
So instead of the ane, methane, ethane, propane, butane,
Yeah.
it's propene, ENE. So the ENE extension means that there is a double bond. And because there's a double bond, we can't link 8 hydrogen atoms to these 3 base carbon atoms. So now that 1000 series refrigerant are called unsaturated molecules because they're not holding all the hydrogen that they can hold. So when we talk about 1000 series refrigerant, our 1233ZD, 1234ZE, these are unsaturated molecules because 2 of the carbon atoms are sharing a double bond. In our industry, however, we use the term olefin. We say, oh, it's an
Yeah.
HFO.
Right.
Or we use alkene and we interchange these. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a
I
sec.
have myself. So this
Yeah,
is
and these refrigerants can contain hydrogen,
Mhm.
carbon, fluorine, and yes, they can contain chlorine. Now check this out.
Mhm.
HFO refrigerants that we use have a 0 ODP and a very low global warming potential. But how can they possibly contain chlorine? Well, they can. It's because these refrigerants are unsaturated, their life in the atmosphere is very, very short. So even though they can contain chlorine,
Right.
they don't exist in the atmosphere long enough to do any damage
Ozone depletion.
to ozone. So this might really ruffle some feathers because, oh, how can it have a 0 ODP if it contains chlorine? And that's the double bond. That's the ENE. So this is where it gets really, really crazy. So on the left, you have propane, C3H8. Propane has 8 hydrogen atoms bonded to those 3 carbon atoms, and hence it is saturated.
Mhm.
Can't hold any more hydrogen. Look at the molecule on the left, on the right. That's propene. The ene, E-N-E, refers to that double bond. Notice those 2 left-hand carbons, there's a double bond. So the carbon on the right is bonded to 4 atoms, 3 hydrogens and the center carbon. That center carbon is bonded to 4 atoms. It's bonded to that hydrogen atom, it's bonded to the carbon atom on the right, that's 2, and it's bonded to the carbon on the left twice. So that counts as 4 bonds.
Sure,
The
absolutely.
carbon on the left bonds to each of those hydrogens 1 time,
Mhm.
and to that center carbon twice. So propane, C3H8, 3 carbons, 8 hydrogens, saturated. Propene on the right, C3H6. It's only bonding 6 hydrogens, so it's unsaturated. It's not grabbing and holding on to the maximum number of hydrogen atoms. So the sponge has a little bit of room in it, but it's that extra bond between the 2 carbons that's taking care of it. So in our industry, we tend to use the words olefins and alkenes interchangeably.
Mhm.
And for our industry, where we're dealing with propene exclusively, it's okay to say that. But an olefin, generally speaking, is a substance that when it reacts with vapor chlorine creates an oily substance. So there are a lot of other
Other
bonds, there
chemical
are a lot of
reactions
other
going on.
molecules
Yeah,
that do that.
that could be an
So
olefin, but may not be an alkene.
yes, so all alkenes are olefins,
Right.
right? If you look at that red circle
Yeah.
that represents alkenes, all alkenes are olefins, but all olefins are not alkenes. So you can have an olefin that's an acyclic alkene, that's a cyclic alkene, That's a Pauline. Pauline has more than one double bond. All right. An alkane has two double bonds.
In the same
An
molecule.
alkatrine has three double bonds.
Makes
So
sense.
there are a lot of other elements that fall under the umbrella of olefins.
How do you fit all
So
this in your brain?
that's why I have a PowerPoint presentation. Yeah, unfortunately, it does fit in there.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So here's the deal. So let's try the numbering system with 1234YF.
Okay.
All right. So 1234 plus 90 is 1324.
Mm-hmm.
Right. 1324. The first number is a double bond. That tells us that's in a propene-based refrigerant.
Yep.
Because right, we have 3 carbon atoms. Because we had 90 to 1234, we get 1324. 1 double bond, 3 carbons, 2 hydrogens, and 4 fluorines. That's where we go. 1324. 1 double bond, 3 carbons, 2 hydrogens, 4 fluorines. But where do the fluorines go?
I was getting ready to ask that. I see.
We don't know. Well, remember, we have 1234YF. What does the YF mean? The YF tells us where the hydrogens, fluorines, chlorines go. So the Y on the YF is our central carbon. That's the carbon in the middle. If that number is an X, the atom that gets connected to that central carbon is chlorine. If it's a Y, it gets fluorine. If it's a Z, it gets a hydrogen. So the Y in YF tells us that that central carbon atom is connected, is bonded to a fluorine atom. See it? That's the central carbon. So there it goes. We have a fluorine. So that Y in the YF tells us that that central carbon is bonded to a fluorine. Now let's take a look at the methylene carbon. Methylene, ENE, double bonded carbon. That's the carbon on the left. If it's an A, both of those atoms connected to that carbon are chlorine. If it's a B, one's chlorine, one's fluorine. If it's a C, they're both fluorine. If it's a D, one is hydrogen, one is chlorine. If it's an E, one's a hydrogen, one's a fluorine. And if it's an F, they're both hydrogen.
So we're just replacing the
hydrogen with whatever that tells you.
Except for an F, and it replaces it with itself.
So because it's YF, the F is our methylene carbon. That's the double bonded carbon.
Yep.
And it tells us that it's hydrogen. All right. So those 2 hydrogens stay the same, which means we need 4 fluorines. Well, they can't go to the left, so they have to go to the right. So what we're looking at right now is a molecule of our 1234YF. Right? And what is 1234YF? 1234YF is an HFO refrigerant. It's a hydrofluoroolefin because it's an olefin because it has that double bond. Kind of interesting stuff.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, 1233ZD, same deal. Let's look at it. 1233 plus 90 is 1323. Right? We have 1 double bond. We have 3 carbon atoms, right? That first 3. We have 2 hydrogens and 3 fluorine atoms. So again, where do they go? Right? That first Z, right? The 1233Z means that central carbon is bonded to hydrogen.
Yep.
And the D means we're bonded to a hydrogen and a chlorine.
So it substitutes 1 hydrogen with a chlorine.
Yeah. So look, so 1233ZD looks like that. So 1233, which is an HFO refrigerant, actually contains chlorine.
I thought I was crazy when I was reading the chemical attributes, because I always go on to Wikipedia and look through all the different chemicals when I see something that I'm not familiar with, because it breaks out what are the chemical components of it.
Yeah, this annoys a lot of people because how can it have chlorine?
That's exactly what I said.
Yeah. So remember, our 1233ZD is an unsaturated molecule, so it doesn't last long enough in the atmosphere to do any damage to ozone.
So the chlorine breaks apart easier, comes back down to the ground, and is not a suspended particle in the atmosphere.
Yeah. So the last thing I want to chat about is numbering, is the naming. So it's like, okay, how do we name these refrigerants? Well, if we know the DuPont numbering system, we could determine what type of refrigerants. We could draw a molecule. We can also name it, because the name starts with how many chlorine atoms are in the molecule. Then it goes how many fluorines are in the molecule, and then it finishes with the base molecule. So you'll hear crazy terms like monochloro, trifluoromethane, or actually that won't do that one. Trichloro, difluoroethane, or something like that. So it really talks about how many chlorine atoms, followed by how many fluorine atoms, followed by the base molecule of the refrigerant. So for example, right, if we have a refrigerant, the base molecule includes all of the hydrogens and the carbons. That says all chlorine and hydrogen. That's actually wrong. So I'm going to get off that slide because that's bad. Don't look at that. So all the hydrogen atoms and carbon atoms in the base molecule are included in the methane, ethane, propane, butane, whatever it is. So take a look at this. This is a molecule of R22. We drew this earlier, right? We looked at the number. We see, okay, the R22 molecule is a methane-based molecule. It has 2 fluorine atoms and 1 chlorine atom. So the way we name, what's the name of this refrigerant? We say, oh, it's R22, but what's the chemical name? Well, it starts off with the number of chlorines, mono 1, monochloro, 1 chlorine, followed by the number of fluorines. So monochloro, 1 chlorine, 2 fluoro, monochloro, difluoro, and then the base molecule, which is methane. So if you look at a drum of R22, you're going to see monochloro difluoromethane or chloro-difluoromethane. I put the mono in parentheses.
Yeah, because it doesn't have to be there.
And so if you read it backwards, right, it's a methane molecule where we've replaced hydrogen with 2 fluorines and 1 chlorine. And that's the name of the refrigerant. That's the chemical name of R22, monochloro difluoromethane. All right, kind of neat. So R134A, all right, R134A is an ethane-based molecule, has 4 fluorine atoms. So we have no chlorine, so we don't talk about it.
Right, go straight to fluoro.
Right. So mono 1, di 2, tri 3, tetra. If you played Tetris growing up, tetra 4. So the name for R134A is tetrafluoro
dihydro.
No, the dihydro.
You don't need hydro because it's part of the ethane.
Right. The dihydro, the two are part of the ethane molecule. All of the carbons and all of the hydrogens that are there get wrapped into that base molecule. So the chemical name for R134A is tetrafluoroethane. So if you read it backwards, it's an ethane molecule where we replaced hydrogen with 4 fluorines.
Oh my gosh.
I'm telling you, it gets really stupidly easy when you think about it. So here, R1234YF, right, has 4 fluorine atoms, no chlorine. So there's no chlorine. We don't talk about it. We got, again, tetrafluoro, right, 4 fluorines. And the base molecule for 1234YF is propene. So the chemical name for 1234YF is tetrafluoropropene.
So it's a propene?
Yeah, because it's a propene. See that double bond? It's an alkene. Right? So the chemical name, read it backwards, it's a propene molecule where we replaced 4 hydrogens with fluorine. Comes from, you can figure out what type of refrigerant, you can figure out how to name it, and you can figure out what type it is. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, you can reach me at eugene@escogroup.org. You can reach me at eugene.silberstein@yahoo.com. And those are my phone numbers. So now that I blew your brain, so I'm going to turn my nice.
I know. Party time. It's time to. It's the after show hour show. All right, we got quite a few people still out there in the audience. Anyone have any questions for Professor Silberstein while we've got him here? And yeah, no, bring that music in there, Daniel. It's Christmas time. Let's enjoy this season. I know it's a lot of information, but we always try to break things down and make them understandable. Even myself, there's a lot of things for me to learn. You know, part of being an educator is realizing that there's no way we can know everything. But if we look to the experts in the industry, bring in the people who truly have the passion to educate on different topics, then every week we'll have a new topic from a different passionate educator. See how I turned that around with the Eugene? You see what something is? We just read it backwards. It'll tell us
There you go.
is Eugene real or is he a robot? Yeah, I know. That is a very, very good question. Sam, man.
I am a real robot.
Real robot. I see Sam out there. Sam, you got a question? Go ahead and put it into the chat section for us, and we'll see what we can come up with.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, thanks you, Paul. This is a great presentation. I mean, even myself, I knew enough to be dangerous, and so the more we continue talking about, especially these new refrigerants, our blended refrigerants, and our 1000 series refrigerants, there's a lot of things that need to be answered. Hey, how's it going, Rob? So, that's why we do this. We get better and better as we go forward. Thank you, David. Glad to have you here. Tom, thanks for joining us. All right. Well, this is our holiday special. And for whatever holiday you all we'll be hoping for a very Merry Christmas here from the Beck family in Brownsburg, Indiana. And we look forward to seeing you all again. We will be back week after week. We'll be here next week doing one. I'll actually be on the road doing a little bit of time off, but I cannot take time away from my show. This is one of the most important things for me, to spend time with fellow educators and just keep up to date with what's changing our industry. So, Mr. Silberstein, thank you so much for our day. And I hope you have a very, very happy holidays. And we will see everyone again next week on Did You Know? The ESCO HVAC show. Bye, everyone.
Take care.